Oregon is 76th in Bill Connolly's returning production index.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean everything, but it's a guide. I think it is especially important to note Oregon because not only are they losing a lot, offense especially, but they also lost Mario Cristobal, who goes to Miami, and they're employing a first-time head coach in Dan Lanning, who doesn't really have a ton of familiarity with the Pacific Northwest.
West Coast, Pac-12, you're correct. Yeah, he was at ASU briefly when he was very young. That's it. Yeah.
So you take all those factors into consideration. I think you also got to factor in a schedule that to me looks kind of tricky.
Sure.
Not the least of which is Labor Day weekend when they're...
Wait, does it? I feel like I'm looking at...
Well, it's not... If you take a look at it, it is certainly not the hardest schedule that they could play, but I think that first month of action will be very trying.
Sure, of course.
Because anytime you open up with Georgia, they got a BYU team that brings a lot back. BYU should be pretty good again.
Yeah, Eastern Washington.
They've got a game later in the year, I believe, against Utah. That's at home. But it's like you could find landmines on that schedule. So I have to ask the question here. In your mind, I don't know how closely you've paid attention to it. It is late March. Based on what you know now, what is the range of possible outcomes for this Oregon team going into next season? And furthermore, which of those outcomes or which possible thing that could happen would actually leave you concerned about Dan Lanning and whether he can do the job at Oregon?
There's very little that he could or couldn't do in year one that will have me worried unless there is a locker room abandonment issue, that he is not the grown-up in the room and it's becoming clear right away. That to me would be the only thing in year one. Be like, oh man, he can't handle coaching a major program as a head coach. The variety of outcomes hinges on what I assume to be Bo Nix and whatever the ratio of good Bo to bad Bo is. I don't know what it was at Auburn. Auburn fans can certainly weigh in that it was like a 40-60 experience, a 30-70 experience. Certainly with the way he finished his career there. You know, the Texas A&M game, he made some plays, but they didn't score a touchdown. They didn't get into the end zone. So that was arguably his worst statistical performance of his career. And it was his second to last game, his penultimate game at Auburn. But 3 of those 4 games, how he finished his Auburn career, were pretty promising. The Ole Miss game, the Arkansas game, and at least the first half of that Mississippi State game. So if Oregon gets 70-30 good Bo to bad Bo, that's an outcome in which Oregon, with a very experienced offensive line, promising receivers, a good but thin running back room. Byron Cardwell is the new full-time guy with Travis Dye moving to USC and CJ Verdell entering the draft. Defensively, the line's in a decent place. Linebacker has those 2 5-stars. Secondary is a little bit thin, but they brought in at least a transfer at corner. They were hit by the portal a little bit. They lost a key corner, a rotation defensive lineman. They lost guys in the portal.
Yeah.
The big thing to me is going to be, I think the schedule is fantastic. The Georgia game, who cares? Whatever. It's game 1. It's on the road. It's playing in Atlanta. But their road games within the Pac-12, at Wazoo, new full-time head coach and Jake Dickert. At Arizona, which still has a long ways to go, but improving. At Cal, which has not had an offense and has not really been anything beyond a vague bowl threat. At Colorado, which is trending in the wrong direction. And at Oregon State, which is feisty, but shouldn't be deep enough or talented enough to beat Oregon. Now, they do have Utah and Washington in, it looks like, consecutive weeks. They have UCLA after a bye week, but it's in Eugene. I don't know. I think the schedule's fine.
It's a good home schedule. It's a really
good road home split.
You know, you could definitely make the case that Utah is going to be loaded again. They'll be decent. Maybe UCLA gets better. I don't know.
Right.
I think Stanford has to get better. You would think they have to get better. I don't know.
Right.
So, you know, as we've seen time and again with some of these Pac-12 schedules, sometimes it's the games you don't know. The games that don't jump out at you in March that are the ones that end up taking you down.
The problem for me with Oregon, and I think there is a lot of upside because I still think they're more talented than anybody on their schedule. So that's a good place to start on their Pac-12 schedule. Excuse me, not more talented than Georgia. First time head coach, first time full play calling offensive coordinator, and quarterback transfer, which we use the word cocktail last episode about rivalry games and the spiciest, most balanced cocktails. It doesn't feel like an especially promising cocktail because there's so much unknown. What is the vision Dan Lanning has for his offense? What is the vision Kenny Dillingham has for his offense after spending time with both Gus Malzahn and Mike Norvell? And I am just never a huge fan in having to talk yourself into a QB. Now, there have been guys who have gone from fine to really good, or afterthought to surprisingly good after 2-3 years of playing or being a backup and not being able to crack a starting lineup. You look at like what Will Levis did at Kentucky. He transfers to Kentucky. They need a quarterback post Terry Wilson. Expectations, the bar wasn't set particularly high with Terry Wilson. I think it was Eddie Gran was the offensive coordinator at Kentucky. They just sort of handed the ball off a lot. And Liam Cohen and Will Levis fully and completely soared past all expectations.
Oh my God. I mean, Kentucky went 10-3. Will Levis said,
like, you could not have imagined Will Levis.
No, 2/3 of his passes. I think it was 66%.
Right. And, Wan'Dale Robinson comes in. Like, that was a surprise that you had to talk yourself into Will Levis and Liam Cohen succeeding together, and they exceeded expectations. And that happens. Like, I would imagine Pitt fans were fine with Kenny Pickett heading into last year. Like, he's experienced, he's a calming influence, he knows the system, he's comfortable in the ACC. He's one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC. Completely exceeds expectations last year, right? So there are those situations. The problem is, those seem to be exceptions to the rule. When you have to talk yourself into quarterback of like, oh, well, maybe it's a fresh start. Oh, well, maybe he looks like he did at the end of his career. Oh, well, maybe he just needs the lack of pressure
in that voice too. The voice
in that voice specifically.
Important. Yeah,
that's a problem to me. If you're talking yourself into a quarterback with his known flaws and what they're up against in terms of the unknown, I don't know. I think the best case scenario for Oregon is they lose to Georgia and they lose to Utah, and they're able to sneak out the rest of their schedule and go 10-2 because Bo Nix has decent enough command, and he's not the reason they lose games, not necessarily the reason they win games, but he does enough so that every Oregon fan and every college football fan watches their games and says he's pretty solid. He's
10-2 would be a revelation in year one, right?
I think the Pac-12 is in a place right now, and I'm terribly concerned about the quarterback room moving forward. The thing that would actually concern me, you asked about what would be concerning about Dan Lanning in year one. What does he do at quarterback for the future? Right now, Oregon has 3 former blue chip quarterbacks in that room: Bo Nix, Jay Butterfield, and Ty Thompson. You would be hard pressed to find an Oregon fan confident in the position moving forward. Now, Oregon's major target in this current recruiting cycle, as we mentioned, is going to Tennessee. At least that's what we figure is going to happen. He's going to end up at Tennessee. There are other interesting quarterback prospects on the West Coast. I don't follow it particularly closely. If Dan Lanning fully strikes out in terms of bringing in an interesting high ceiling type quarterback in this class and has to depend on the portal once again, I mean, who do we suspect is going to be out there? We could talk about, Miller Moss and Hudson Card and all these guys that are, former blue chip guys who are sitting on the bench. But if he is not able to secure a quarterback of the future in this class, I wouldn't be concerned, but I'd file it away thinking, because I know you need time to build up those relationships as a head coach and your offensive coordinator, and nobody knows what Oregon's system is going to be. So that's more difficult for quarterbacks to know. Like, you have an idea of what Tommy Rees is going to do at Notre Dame with the new full-time head coach. You have an idea what Brian Kelly and Mike, what's his name? Who's the offensive coordinator for LSU?
Denbrock.
I was thinking DeBoard. Mike Denbrock. You have an idea. You know what Billy Napier is probably going to do-ish at Florida. Oregon's the mystery there. And so they have work to do in explaining and showing future quarterbacks what Oregon's offense is going to be. So that would be the concern to me in year one, that Dan Lanning does not lock in a promising quarterback of the future.
That was a very thoughtful answer, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ty.
Thank you for sharing that with me. Let's move on.